for staying with us for the full agenda. Right now, we're going to introduce what is the first of two component solution case study panels. Today, we have a member of the family, Ashwini Jarral. Of course, many of you know him as being the former executive director of the IJIS Institute. He has now moved on to be the founder and the COO for IDYA4. And we have Major Ed O'Carroll, also a close member of the family, Bureau Commander for Major Crimes, Cyber and Forensics out of Fairfax County PD. Now, today we have chatted about how large the spectrum and the comprehensive solution that is warranted for addressing justice reform. We understand it to be something vast. We understand it to be something different to different individuals. We understand that it's something that not only is a root issue of accessing the data, but one that far reaches to policy implication, operational impacts, financial implications, community education, and so many more facets. To that end, one more aspect of the total justice reform operation is one of officer wellness. And truly, it's something that was there before the Prize for Justice Reform, and certainly expands and has reached far beyond justice reform. It's not something that is specific to officer wellness. It is to practitioner wellness. And that's exactly some of the core messages that both Ashwini and Ed will be chatting about today. They'll share with us their experiences, their lessons learned, some of their challenges, and then we'll open it up to questions. So gentlemen, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you so much, Maria. Thanks for inviting us. And I will turn it over to Major Ed O'Carroll just to give us a quick background, and then we'll start with our presentation. So Major.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Really a pleasure to be here. 32 years on the job come this September. I started on September 11th, 1989 in this profession. Served in many capacities, policy, in operations now in our detective bureau, in patrol, internal affairs, investigations. I was also our peer support commander, and I'll talk about what our peer group does and how much it's changed over the past 2 or 3 decades in the public safety sector. So glad to be here. Thanks for the invite on behalf of Fairfax County of Virginia, just outside the Washington metropolitan area. We serve a population of about 1.2 million people. And again, just thanks for an opportunity to share some of our challenges, our successes, and I think where our path is leading us in the future. Thank you.
Thanks, Major. So again, most of you on this briefing know me, but just a quick background. Of course, as Maria said, that last year started my own venture, and now I'm part of the bigger organization called Cloud MD. So IDYA4 is now a proud member of Cloud MD family. Our focus is around revolutionizing the digital healthcare. And one of the things that I've been passionate about is, and why we're bringing and having this discussion from IDYA4 side, is how we as a company can play a role in bringing a technology with matching to the processes around the health and wellness with clinicians that we know are out there and are actually trained to serve the needs of first responder community and law enforcement. Because quite often the challenge that we are facing, and what we have learned, and I have personally learned in the last 12 months, is that we, as Maria said, we have been talking about officer health and wellness for quite a while. But when you look at the numbers are staggering here, because, and I'll talk about those, and it's a challenge that I put in front of all the IJIS members to look at how we can leverage technology to address the community we serve, but above all, how we can bring this technology to address the health and wellness. When we talk about reform, if you pick any justice reform across the country, one of the common themes that is going on within the justice reform across the states is addressing the health and wellness. Quite often we put so much emphasis on health that we forget the wellness piece, and health and wellness have to go hand in hand. And this is something that is a huge challenge that we face, not just in United States, we face this in North America, we face this across the world. Our first responders, our law enforcement officers are out there serving our communities and keeping us safe. But in the end, what we are doing is a very poor job in addressing the safety and the health and wellness of what they need. And of course, there are a lot of solutions out there. And one of the challenges that we face is that as an IJIS, we talk about information sharing. At IJIS, we talk about collaboration. At IJIS, we talk about policy gaps. And what we are learning is in just to address that very basic needs around health and wellness, we have similar gaps when it comes to health and wellness. And we cannot have a conversation of criminal justice reform without looking at the health and wellness of justice professionals. And I use the word very carefully of justice professionals because it's about the policing community. It's about the fire, emergency management community. It's about corrections officers. It's about the folks that are the first point of entry into the public safety realm, which is the 911 community that is quite often ignored. And it was fascinating to me that when I was trying to do a research on these areas, I was able to get numbers for law enforcement officers. I was able to get the numbers on fire. I was able to get the numbers on EMS, how wide this problem is. But the areas where I was not able to get any statistics or any data was around our 911 professionals who are out there, who are the first point of entry that are out there and facing a lot of trauma. There's no help for them. There are no numbers. And when you talk in closed door meetings, you will hear a lot of stories that how we need to keep them into this discussion. And the shocking to me was the corrections officer. Nobody's collecting the data on corrections officer. Nobody knows how deep the suicidal problem is in the corrections officer. Nobody knows how deep this problem is when it comes to addiction crisis. So this is something that as a solution provider, as a company, if you have the data, we need to get together as a public safety professional or an agency. If you can do your part to share how deep this problem is so we know how we can collectively bring the solution. So reform and the health and wellness have to go hand in hand. We cannot talk about reform without caring about other professionals who are spending their day in and out and have committed to this profession to keeping our community safer and healthier. So one of the things is that we need to talk during this discussion, and I'll look for a major to guide us through this discussion from some of the case study or use case of how Fairfax County is actually addressing this. And there are a lot of other departments around the country who are very actively engaged in this discussion. And there are a lot of solutions out there. So don't get me wrong, there are solutions, but the question that we need to answer is, are those solutions working? Are they effective? So let me give you a context of when we talk about health and wellness. So when we look at just in the area of suicide, in a general population, 13 out of every 100,000 people die by suicide. But when you take the same number and now look at from a different angle and just zero in on the police officers, that numbers go to 17. So we have 13 in general population that commit suicide on an annual basis, and then 17. So this is something we have to look at very seriously. When you also look at the numbers of the law enforcement officer suicide, if they are taking their own lives. In 2018, we had 167 law enforcement officers who tragically took their own lives. In 2019, that number went to 239. In 2020, we were better, but that number is still at 173. And we are sitting here and we are not even halfway through the year in 2021. We already have 76 officers who have committed suicide. So this problem is, even the numbers tell a story, but we know that there are others, and these are just the numbers that are reported that we know of. And there might be numbers that we don't know. So we have to do a better job of bringing solution when we look in context of addressing the aspect of behavioral health, which includes the suicide. And when we actually start look at the behavioral health context and the conditions in the police officers, so if we look at depression, especially after major event and especially after what we are facing in our communities around the justice reform and this whole movement around the perception and dealing with the police officers, is that it is taking a toll on our officers. And over and over, we have seen that after these significant events, now we had a pandemic, we had this whole conversation of justice reform. This is taking a toll, and results have shown that Just in the depression category, the number is as high as 25% in the police officers after these main events. So that is a huge number. When you look at the substance use disorder, and especially if I zero in on one area of alcohol, that number goes, if you are consuming 2 drinks per day, that numbers go actually as high as 7 drinks per day. So that's a huge number. And when you look at the, I'm going to go back to the suicide for a second in the police officers, that when you just look male versus female officers, that in female, the suicide rate is actually high, it's 25%. When you look at the males, it is at 23.1. It's not that far off, but that tells you the context of how broad this problem is when we look at the police officers. When you start looking at the emergency management or emergency medical services personnel, which we bucket into the first responder community, when you look at the depression, their depression rate is approximately around anywhere between 7 to 10%, and that number actually spikes after major events like COVID. When you look at stress and post-traumatic stress disorder, almost 7% have mild stress. And of course, we use the term mild very carefully again, but the numbers varies depending on the different locations, geography, and the events that are happening in the society. But when you look at the suicide rate in that particular community, when it comes to the emergency medical services personnel, that number is as high as where 10% approximately people have serious suicide ideation, and 28% professionals think that their life is not worth living. And these are the guys who are actually responding to the events day in and out, and that is what they're feeling about their life and living through this whole behavioral health challenge. Now, let me take you to the other side, in another community, in the firefighter community. When you look at depression, and this is the number that is also, we have to look very closely when you look at the firefighters, that, of course, we know that in the firefighter community, we have the volunteers, we have professionals. So when you even break that number down between male and females, the male volunteer firefighters, the depression rate is 16.85, I would say approximately 17, that's in the volunteer. When you look at the same number in the female volunteer fighters, that is approximately 22%. So again, in the female volunteer firefighter, that number is high. But here's the best one. In the career male firefighters, depression rate is sitting at 13%. But when you add that rate to the female career firefighters, that is 38.5. That is a huge, huge number that we have to look at, is why this is happening, especially when it comes to the female firefighters. So volunteer or career female firefighters are actually at a high risk of depression. The same thing with the substance use disorder. When you look at the alcohol, that number jumps to 50% in the male firefighters. But here's the number that was really concerned me. In female firefighters, the actual addiction rate is sitting at 83.3%. That is something that I did not expect in my research. And this is something that we need to figure out, is why this is happening and how we can help this community, especially when it comes to the female firefighters. And same behavior we see in the suicide or suicide ideation. When you look at actual, I would say volunteer versus the career. So actual retired firefighters that actually try to commit suicide, that number is at 46.8. And people who are actually actively engaged in this profession, that is at 19.2%. So when you look across just in the first responder community, in the law enforcement, fire and EMS services, depression, addiction, suicide ideation is a huge, huge problem. And the question that we need to answer is why this is happening to these folks who are giving us all they have and spending more time with us in the community versus their family, and they're going through this. So don't get me wrong, there are a lot of solutions out there, but the question that we need to answer is, are those solutions working? And what do we need to do better? And what are some of the lessons learned are through the pandemic, through this criminal justice reform that's happening, and how the agencies out there are addressing. So I'll turn it over to Major to talk about how Fairfax County Police Department is addressing this health and wellness issue.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for that. I'm just so intrigued about the national perspective, international to some degree, what's happening in this public safety space. We really almost should have a moment of silence for all the lives lost. And I sincerely mean that this is for so long, an untalkable subject at the senior staff level, at the chief level, peer-to-peer level. Oftentimes it was the hidden secret that many agencies, many individuals would carry. Those numbers that you shared, I've heard them over and over and over again. And I can tell you what we've done in Fairfax County. Some of our cases brought us to our knees. We've had on-duty suicides. We had a senior detective, multi-decade detective, drive into the back lot of the police station and take his life. Devastating day for the Fairfax County Police Department, the family, the police family, the community. A similar thing, although albeit off duty in the fire department, the Fairfax County Fire and Rescue Department, we had a young lady, a career firefighter, take her life. She went missing for several days, and she was found out in the Shenandoah. So, and it's no different in our sheriff's office. We struggle with all the things that you mentioned. I will say the one thing you didn't mention. I heard everything. That's because it's almost like mentioned at the academy. Is a divorce is almost imminent for anyone in this profession. But I'll tell you, at all the things you mentioned, I'll take a divorce over some of these other struggles because it's real. The addictions are real. The thoughts of suicide are real and present. And I'm going to move fairly quickly, but I'm going to say Fairfax County had our struggles. We had plenty of them. We had a loss of life. We actually had 6 deaths in 5 years in my agency of active and retired members. 6 members of the department in 5 years. That's 6 too many. 5 too many, 6 too many, and there's others that struggle that we don't even know about. So what we've done, the step we took is we heard all the national discussion. We heard all the data points that bring us to the curiosity. Well, what about my team? And we did a survey. We did a very comprehensive survey, and we did a follow-up one. And what's interesting, we did one post-COVID, and we did one as COVID and the justice reform came upon our world, our profession, our agency. And the first survey we did was in 2019. We had 26 law enforcement agencies. Fairfax County led the charge, 26 public safety agencies, 911 centers, sheriff's office, PDs, partnership with the United States Marshal Service, 5,000 first responders completed the survey, 5,000. So it's pretty good sampling of folks in this region dealing with, East Coast, Central East Coast, reform issues and things like that. I'll tell you, the response rate was staggering. 60% of those surveyed, had the courage to speak about oftentimes what is the forbidden topic, such as trauma, depression, alcohol use, and the consideration of suicide. That's pretty impressive that so many felt comfortable. What's interesting in our group, and Fairfax County had a great survey response on this. What's so sad in so many ways is 1 out of 4 respondents, 1 out of 4, said they suffered from depression because of their job. And I can tell you, sitting in the seat now for 30 plus years, it's cumulative. We often, hear about the war heroes that come back from fighting America's wars around the world. We've long now recognized in the past several decades, the realness to PTSD and the trauma that they bring back. And it's no different in public safety, whether you're answering the 911 call, you're dealing with a correctional workforce or a first responder going to 911 calls. I mean, for an example, I was on a homicide scene yesterday at exactly this time. We had a young man stab his father to death. And that's cumulative. In the past 3 years, I've been in this command seat, major crimes for 3 years. I've been on 35 homicides. So I personally worry about that for myself and really try to guide myself. I'm going to talk about the model we set up, which really shifted to kind of a startup effort to something larger. And I know we have agencies that are small, budgets have shrunk or will be shrinking, right? Defund the police. You probably heard about it. And the question is the money going to go to frontline officers or some type of care for those troops? So I got some ideas on that. Another statistic thing about the thoughts of suicide out of our those surveyed, we had almost 5% that thought about it in the past year. 5% in the past 12 months thought about taking their own life, which is just, again, just staggering. And again, I had mentioned the breakup. I'll break down. I will mention it. 15 police departments, 6 fire and rescue departments, 5 911 public safety centers, and the sheriff's office was included in that. And oftentimes, most said that the depression that was upon them was absolutely work-related, cumulative exposure to stress and scenes and things like that. So one of the questions we asked everyone is if you wanted help but didn't ask, like that one officer that went into the back lot of our police station, never asked for help. Again, he may he rest in peace, but we're asking people now if, again, privately in the survey, if you didn't seek help, how come? And 642 out of those folks said it was a stigma, that they could be perceived as being weak or they're embarrassed. What's interesting is 1,485 said I can handle it on my own. And I don't need the resources and other things. So we find that very impactful. Folks that can deal with it on their own, or they have their own strategy. And the stress that comes along with the various things that impact. And what we did find when we did a follow-up one about COVID was a big concern. And even the negative perception of the profession about the social change. In our study, 91% of the respondents said the stress that they were enduring, 91% said negative media about our profession, the public safety profession, was a part of it. Low morale in the workforce was 87, pretty high up there. The potential exposure to COVID was 84%. That's why I do think as we went through 2020, the COVID issue, the justice reform, and some of the things took a big impact. With the general negative attitude, 78% said it was a general attitudes about the profession that really kind of hurt them. I do want to hit this because oftentimes people in our profession, many of us, even outside of profession, you want to be a self fixer, right? I got it. I got a plan. And I want to share with you some of the things that people tried to self-remedy. 83% said when they felt stressed to a significant point, their goal was to spend time with family. And again, all these things, I hope it works. One thing that stood out at me, and it's almost like for me, a red flag, is 61% thought that they would use humor to get through the stress, that using humor would be a successful strategy. And maybe it is for some. Some would escape through television or streaming devices. And just think that for a minute. If you're having a stressful day, you're going to go to your social media platforms and look at streaming videos. I'm not a psychologist, but I do wonder if some of the efforts that people have tried might be almost detrimental to a positive outcome. And again, it's a personal zone choice on what they decide to do. Two final things on this point. 46% drink socially. And that worries me. 46% said I'm going to drink socially to relax. I'll find a little bit of humor in this. And again, it might work for a lot of people, is 36% are going to, the answer was engage with nature. Engage with nature, which actually I'm thinking that's pretty good. Like go on a nice hike, leave the streaming device back, leave the alcohol back, leave the cell phone back, and engage with nature. That would probably be very beneficial. But people are worried about confidentiality, and they are worried about getting in trouble in our profession. And I want to hit on this point. I've got just a couple minutes left on my topic here. One thing we changed is when we have misconduct that comes up and we think it's a component of cumulative stress, PTSD, it's misconduct that, and maybe it's someone that has consumed too much alcohol and they're in a position where they're in trouble for an alcohol consumption charge, maybe coming into work with alcohol on their breath. We used to, for 30 years I was here, you'd be right off to internal affairs, relieved of duty in an internal affairs case. We don't do that anymore. Many of those cases are now diverted down a track of support, care, keeping the officer whole, and dealing with the underlying issue. I have a less of a concern about your alcohol on your breath reporting to duty. It's a big deal. As an IA commander for 3 years, it will be dealt with. But what we're going to do is be sensitive about it and look at being adaptable and flexible and diversion. Get that officer help and support, and not go to a 20-day suspension and think that solves the problem. Actually, I would suspect that makes the problem much worse. Now, our effort here is a multifaceted approach. We used to do just peer support. I was on peer support. We talked to each other, but we did bring in contract psychologists that are on staff. We brought in our chaplain program. We've got EAP, Employee Assistance Program. So we have branched out to 3, 4, 5 things and have expanded it. And you heard this mentioned earlier, not just the physical wellness, but the mental wellness, the financial wellness. We know that bears a weight on our job satisfaction and things like that really have an underlined, it's the undercurrent of feeling good about serving, being supportive of the change that's upon us. And we have co-production models on making the profession better. And we've been at the table after George Floyd to the terrible death there to look at what can we do better? How can we do respond to calls better, and intervene when it's necessary, and train our workforce to be supportive to what the community wants. We're community servants, provide a service, great profession, but it does come with those stresses. They have to be dealt with, but it can't just be peer support. It can't just be this or just be that. It should be a multifaceted approach. I do have some of this survey information. I'll put my information in the chat box. I'll share our work here, but I'll finish on this point. Survey your people. Do it professionally. Do it with privacy. We can tell you how we've done it here, because you need that baseline. How are your people feeling? And when the data came back, we had more people at the table to say, this is a concern. This is not data from far away. These are our first responders, and we owe it to them. We can't lose another life.
Thanks, Major. So I know that you hit on some of the gaps, and I will come back to you on that. So one of the things that is also important to understand is that one of the things that is happening is that when Major was talking about confidentiality, that one of the things that is should not be surprising to you who actually work in this community, then 1 out of 4 professionals will not seek help because of stigma. And that is where privacy is front and center of this, and that number is really high even compared to the general population. When you say 1 out of 4 law enforcement professionals or first responders will not seek help because of stigma, that is a high number. And I know that some of the agencies are looking at how to address that, because that's a huge gap. It's a perception. Also, some of the gaps that I have personally learned in my conversation with some of the chiefs around the country in the policing world, with some of the sheriffs, also with some of the folks who are running the PSAPs, and also the fire chiefs, that even the peer support is great, but quite often people are even hesitant to go and talk to their own peers, because they have this thing in their mind that if I go and seek help, if I go ask for something, then I will be basically part of the investigation, or they're going to zero in on me. And that is something that we have to figure out how to address this, because this is not a technology problem, but technology can be leveraged to address how we can use some of the capabilities out there to offer peer-to-peer support. But also the other thing is that training, especially the supervisor training. I think this is something where if we have any learning management system companies on this briefing, to step up and ask, hey, what we can do, how we can actually put the training programs out there, how we can bring the training, because I know there's an officer wellness training, and with COVID, one thing we have learned is that it might not be basically possible to get everybody in the classroom. So how we can even bring that training cannot stop. We have to not just train the officers, but also figure out a better way to address the training needs of the supervisors, so people do feel comfortable and having that conversation with the supervisor. So there's a solution that can be developed. There's an approach that can be developed, whether it's a treatment, whether it's a program, whatever works, that needs to be addressed in the training context. But the other gap is that today, everything that, again, I don't know everything, but what I have learned is that today there's a lot of physical involvement in seeking help. That means, hey, if you're having a suicidal ideation, go call 100 number. That still requires an effort to pick up a phone, call the number. Now you get connected. Now you have to go and seek help. And even the EAP programs that are out there, they're actually fighting back, especially when we look in context of first responders, because the folks that are offering these services and support service through EAP programs are not trained to address the needs of first responders, because they do not understand the stress level that first responders go through. So we also need to figure out a way how to work with these EAP companies to bring the services where the folks that are going to be answering and providing help, whether they're counselors, whether they're psychiatrists, psychologists, whoever, that they are trained and they do understand this profession, because we cannot put same individuals that are providing help to folks like me to give the same kind of advice to Major or his staff. So we have to figure out a better way to actually train the EAP professional. But also the biggest gap is privacy. And we need to figure out if we want officers or even professionals or their families to seek help, we right out of the gate have to address the privacy. There are a lot of tools, there are a lot of technologies mature enough. We need to figure out how to address, because that's a huge operational gap in having this conversation. So those are some of the gaps that we have discovered. Even there's a helpline. I don't know if anybody on this webinar or a briefing have any numbers on how effective or what is the usage level of those helpline is, but love to see that. So we got to figure this out. So those are some of the gaps that I have personally observed in my conversation from the community, but I'll turn it back to you, Major, to talk about some of the gaps that you're seeing from your experience in this field.
Yeah, so we branded our unit called Incident Support Services. We wanted to give it a brand, a name, because again, it involves the chaplain. So you have the clergy, it involves EAP, because they do have a role. We had lessons learned on that. On our police shootings, we had a policy, you had to go to EAP 3 times before you got returned to duty. Well, we moved away from that for reasons you just explained, the exact reason you explained, and moved to a contracted psychologist that responds to the station the day of the shooting and gets involved with that officer. And we make an immediate decision to give a brand new gun, and we start that debrief, the therapy, the wellness, the mental wellness after an officer involved shooting, deputy involved shooting, right from the scene, almost, or the station, I should say. But people are concerned about confidentiality. Our peer team has been around for 30 years, and we have a deepened policies, very clear, bold letters that they are a non-disclosure, under a non-disclosure mandate. Only the court or the chief of police, him or herself, could, or exigent circumstances, mandatory reporting where you have to, for the safety of others, if you have to report it. But generally, they always operate under a confidentiality, and they go through training, and they're highly selected for the team, but it's still a peer support is great, but it's a tier of many that should be on that ladder. And then again, the psychologist, the EAP, or frankly, even working closely with our insurance providers to get referrals, to seek professionals that have the insight to public safety. We used to send people off just to check the box, and that's decades ago. We've moved past that, but we do like the fact that we're branded as a team, because people are concerned about getting in trouble with security clearance, a promotion, and we've tried to remove as much as we can the stigma. I'll give you an example. We had an officer, he was drinking a lot off duty, he had a DWI. And again, traditionally, we would do a case, that's a month suspension, maybe a demotion. But when we first came in contact with that case, it wasn't from a discipline angle. It was for treatment. And we did a deferral, alcohol treatment, and looked for other resources for that employee. And I think what happened, I will say what happened after time, the workforce really garnered some faith in management that we really had the best interests of our employees, both active and retired, that we want to get you to retirement. We want you to be healthy. One of the other things that we do here, which I understand maybe isn't as common as I would even thought, we do physicals every year. And during that very robust physical where we're doing all the workups on, blood and weight and, cholesterol. I mean, it's all connected. I'm watching a series, if you've ever seen Manifest, right? When they say like, we're all connected. And it's funny, every time I've heard that now for the 10th time, I'm almost through the series, is they say we're all connected. And it's interesting. All these things that we're talking about, it's all connected. Like we need to have an early warning system. And we have one here where you come late to work 3 times, it's flagged. It's flagged because something's not right. And I'm not saying misconduct. We're not dropping, you're getting written up. It's a sit down, what is going on? And that employee transfers to another division. They're late again for the 4th time. Everybody, the supervisors know about it. So no one slips under the radar. An early warning system, because it's cumulative. And we can catch some of these things as they're small, as they're growing. And then what we find out, it's the divorce, it's the financial woes. I'm working too much overtime. I had a case go to court and the prosecutor didn't prosecute the case. And they walked out of the jail before I was even signed out on the docket. So, and that's why I say it's cumulative. You have to come at it from a multitude of directions. There are challenges. Oftentimes they can be overcome. Being private about what you may know is step number 1. I know as a major in the police department, I got 150 folks outside my door. When people come in and tell me something in private, I remember a supervisor came in yesterday and shared something about a line level detective. I haven't told anybody. I'm giving some resources to the supervisor to get back to the detective, but it's a private matter. And we're going to help that employee and not say you have to be in at 8 a.m. The flexibility and the accommodations and being adaptable, especially in these trying times, is so very important. The goal is to keep people healthy, keep people safe, keep them alive, and get them to retirement so they can enjoy retirement.
Thanks, Major. So one of the things is also like to ask you, Major, is that especially with now COVID, right? We're still not out of the woods when it comes to COVID. Same thing with the justice reform. What are some of the lessons learned that you want to share with everyone from Fairfax County and I'm sure you're hearing the same from your peers around the country. What are some of the lessons learned? What we can do better to address the officer health and wellness?
Yeah, I'll jump in and say, talk about it. Historically, we haven't. Oftentimes, we've got to set the example. I've personally been through personal challenges. My life has not been through a field of daisies on a variety of issues, personally and professionally. And I think everyone needs to know that we're all in this together, and we're all got the trials and tribulations both at work, and if you think someone isn't struggling, they probably are. So I think having a candid conversation, seeking help, being supportive, be the example to others to say it's okay not to be okay. And we've sung that phrase many times in the past couple of years. It wasn't always like that. So it's okay not to be okay. And we're going to get you help and support and lead you in what we think's a positive direction. And you'll be back up on your feet helping others. And many of our peer support members are success stories. They went through the trials, tribulations, and come through it. And now they're in a position to help others and say, you know what, they can actually say, I know how you feel, because they do. That's the rule number one in the peer support program or anything. Never tell someone you know how they feel, because you may not have ever experienced what they're going through, but maybe you have. You may not still understand how or what they feel, but you can at least say, this happened to me. And sometimes it's good to hear that folks have been there. They've gone through a tough time and made it out.
Thanks, Major. So one of the things that I think from our perspective, and I think from the IJIS Institute perspective, I know we have been having this conversation with IJIS leadership and a few other folks in the community, some of the National Practice Association. I think the other lesson learned from COVID and the impact of criminal justice reform, we don't know how deep this problem is, how it's impacting our officers, how it's impacting their family, how it's impacting other folks who are actually in the criminal justice profession or public safety professional. So I think we need to figure out how to collect the data, how to get that data, because I know we talk about standardization. This is something that I think we got to look at is when it comes to officer health and wellness, what kind of data we have, how we want to collect that data, because we only find data about officers, especially in today's world, is when there's an internal investigation going on. Internal affairs has something open, and so of course then we publish that. Now with some of the states, they're publishing the data on the website without having a disposition, and that is impacting our officers, that is impacting their family. One thing that we need to realize, we're not doing any justice to these families, because all these officers, we're actually putting their data on the public domain and making them vulnerable to the bad actors. So this is something is also impacting. So we need to figure out how to get the data, what data needs to be publicly made available, how we want to do a better job of collecting the different systems that are out there that are looking at, and again, we have done this in private sector. We have been looking at work-life balance. We have been looking at performance matrix. Why cannot we do the same thing when it comes to a criminal justice enterprise or the public safety enterprise? Why we cannot bring those lessons learned? We don't have to reinvent the wheel. So here's something that what we need to look at, and I think we have a challenge in front of us, is that how we collect the data. And as I've said in my opening statement, that I am amazed that we do not have a data on 911 professional. We don't have data on corrections officer. And the excuse that was given to me, I'm going to use the word excuse, is that, oh, HIPAA doesn't allow us to share that data. And we all know we're in this profession that if you care about health and wellness about your employees, you can still stay anonymous, but still give the data is how deep this a problem is. So we need to figure out and have a conversation how we want to basically collect the data and bring the technology to the help address the health and wellness. So one thing that I would like to basically also put is that from our perspective, from IDYA4 perspective, with some of the work we're doing in the healthcare community, we are bringing a solution that is holistic in nature, where it's anonymized, it's consent driven, it's secure, it's private, to give you all the resources. We don't want, and one of the things that we have learned is that don't force your employees or officers to go seek help. Have a conversation, give them the resources. And today, you have to go to 10 different places to seek help. So what we are bringing is one-stop shop where you can just go and explore and have access to those resources, where those resources are your daily wellness check, right? Say how you're feeling, how's your mood today, right? That sets the tone for your day. Because there are a lot of things that might be happening in your family as you're going to work. So you just need to know how you want to basically get help to address your mood that day. You have resources which says, I want to learn about this. I want help. Where do I go seek help? I have some symptoms. How do I actually learn about these symptoms? Because today, what happens, we all know, we go search on Google. Thanks to WebMD. WebMD has done a great job of putting a lot of content there. But the question is that content relevant to first responder? Is that content relevant to public safety professionals? So we have to bring a content that is very much focused to our public safety professional law enforcement officers. And then if they need help, let's not force them to call 100 helpline. We have a technology, we have a great technology that exists. Can we use some of that? If they need help in the morning, can we use the technology to connect them to a trusted healthcare professional, behavioral health professional, to seek help when they really need? And these are some of the things that we have to focus on and bring to the table. And that's where technology can help play its part to address the officer wellness. And the question is, we have a lot of content. How we also streamline that content? We have a lot of content overload, because I was also advised it'd be so cool if we can actually put the health and wellness module on the MDTs. And so officers can look at that's great. But the question is, do they have that kind of time? Given everything that's happening, they're working overtime. So how we basically bring the content to them so they can leverage. So Major, one last question for you is that from your perspective, how you see leveraging technology and bringing that to the law enforcement or criminal justice professionals to address their health and wellness? Where do you see technology fitting into this equation?
Oh yeah, it definitely fits in. You mentioned WebMD and many of our resources. So we had, I think the number is about 700 of our employees got exposed to COVID. We have a workforce of about 2,000, about 1,500 sworn. Every member that was quarantined or exposed to COVID, a peer support member, called and checked on. Simple as a phone, simple as the Zoom call. We connected on Teams. We reached out to everyone, and we had COVID exposures. We had one COVID death in my agency. The sheriff's office had one as well. The technology part was real helpful, and the video part of it makes things a lot easier. Privacy of your car, you can connect with that therapist and talk about a struggle. And therapy is a good thing, and it shouldn't be a negative stigma. And I'll candidly say, and I say this to my people, I've talked to a therapist several times in the past year, because, I got 4 kids. I'm 32 years on the job, and life is tough. And it's okay to say, you know what, I'm having a rough day. And there's a few days where it was rough for me. Talked to the department psychologist. I did it on my phone in the car, privacy of my car. I pulled off to an area where no citizen's going to bang on the window for directions while I'm getting help here, but it's okay. And I've used it. I encourage my staff to do it and use it. And I don't get reports on who did or who didn't, but we talk about it and we encourage it and support it. And frankly, I lead by example to tell even my staff that I've met with, we call them Dr. Jill, Dr. Colby, we call them by their first name with the doc reference, and they're part of our family. Contractors, there might be different ones next year, but the good people doing honorable work. I do have 2 questions I want to address them about the early warning system. Are our officers hesitant about that? And the answer is no, because they know about all the triggers, right? If you're late to roll call 3 times, you've been late to roll call. There's nothing secretive about kind of what we track, which is performance. So we do a lot of awards, a lot of recognition. I do Detective of the Month. If you follow me on LinkedIn or some of these other platforms, you'll see I do a lot of public encouragement of my staff. And don't tell anyone I work with, but it's a strategy to build up my people. They do honorable work. Now the discipline part of it, or if they're late to, work or miss a case or something like that, that's done in private. You'll never see that on LinkedIn. But they know the triggers. It's positive because we're getting help, and it's a caring moment, not a negative moment where this is your 4th strike, you're on the bench. 5th strike, you're out of the park. It's your 3rd strike. How can we help? What's going on at home? If there's something that's going on, let's talk about it. And the other part was in reference to that compassion. And again, we try to instill that to say that the department does care. We fire people that need to be fired. We discipline people that need to be disciplined. We help people that need to be helped.
So Major, that's a great point. So I know that one of the things that, as you know, better than a lot of us on this briefing, that this is something that is built over time. It's not one incident, it's built over time. So early warning system is great and can be very helpful. So what are your thoughts about actually having these officers just even understand, because they might not be even thinking, right, to go through a volunteer assessment, which is only accessible to them, that can say, hey, you might not be thinking, but these are some of the behaviors that you might be observing. So what are your thoughts about basically bringing a assessment aspect to this, where officers can do their own self-assessment to understand the behavior that they're portraying and pinpointing where the problem is and then go seek help, because quite often officers don't even know what's causing this, right? So what are your thoughts about bringing an automated assessment process to the officers or professionals?
Yeah, I fully support it. I mean, I do think it has to start somewhere. Maybe it is that self-assessment. Maybe it's that survey. Now, when we did our survey, nobody knew what other people were going to answer, right? Because we generally don't talk about it. At a staff meeting, we're like, hey, who thought about committing suicide in the past 24 hours, right? I mean, who had a stressful day with their kids or their spouse? And that's not what we talk about. We talk about things that actually add to the stress. Like, where is that policy? How come this operation isn't done? And, we're so critical sometimes of things. So oftentimes we're just adding on top of it. So I love the idea of a self-assessment. I love the idea of, once that internal survey is done, and again, privacy and compassion is used to have those markers, you just share the survey with the department. So once we had our survey numbers, our peer support and psychologists and chaplains, our incident support services went back and briefed out. We put numbers on the board. And we did a video. Anyone that messages me, I'll send you the link. It's long. It's like 45 minutes. It's probably 40 minutes too long for a long video to watch and roll call, but it's so powerful. It goes by in 2 minutes because you're watching, you're not taking your eyes off the screen. And we have a multitude of agencies, one employee with my agency, some other agencies that participated in the Washington, D.C. area tell their story. We have one officer that talks about, he picked up his gun and put it in his mouth. I don't need to say anything more. I mean, I thought I really understood all this stuff until I watched that video. I knew of the officer. I met him on calls and things like that. For me to see him share his story, but then talk about where he is today and how he got some help and he's on a better path, and it didn't hurt his promotion. He made sergeant. He's doing other things in his agency, and his chief was supportive. Chief thanked him for coming forward. So it's really remarkable when you see, I think, where we're going. We're not there yet. We've got a long road, and it has to be buy-in everywhere. I don't suspect that all these, our people joining us today, that every department's going to be embracing this. And, there might be agencies where it's a negative impact and people still need to keep the hidden secrets. I hope we get away from that.
Thanks, Major. So I'll turn it back to Maria Cardialis to just ask any questions if Maria has or anybody else has.
Okay.
Yeah, let me just jump, if I could just jump in on Robert's question or point.
Sure.
Yeah.
So Robert, you mentioned about the security clearance. That's terrible. That's terrible. And that's exactly what we need to change. No one should be negative impacted if you seek therapy. Thank you for sharing that. Matter of fact, I applaud you for sharing on this platform, like my share, with my therapy outreach. We didn't talk about the dogs. We have a couple of the therapy dogs. Those are all great, right? But actually, it shouldn't have hurt any process of a security clearance. Matter of fact, it should enhance it because you're reaching out. I probably more worry about someone that doesn't reach out that should. And we probably all know somebody that you're like, boy, I hope they're in therapy or treatment. But those are the ones we probably need to worry about more than the ones that do, because you're on the right track. You're recognizing something and maybe it's extremely small, but you're doing the right thing. So thank you very much for sharing that.
Thank you, Ed, and thank you, Ashwini. First of all, you've both given us a wealth of information that is thought-provoking. Ed, your experiences on a practical basis sometimes are informative and sometimes are shocking. And I say that in the sense that there's so many lessons learned and there's such value in what you've already implemented. The thought that comes to mind is, how do we promulgate that? I mean, Ashwini had similarly excellent pieces of information by way of the tools or the mechanisms to reach those officers or those individuals that may need support. And you're right that it's not about whether they should be chastised because of it or should have any negative impacts, but how do we get this story out? Many of our themes that have come out from prior conversations today have been around the cultural shifts and have been around the data, have been around the education. This is one more of those. This is a notion of education. How do we get this not only to the practitioners, but to the domains in general, right? This is not something that, as we mentioned at the top of the hour, that's only about officer wellness. It's about practitioner wellness across domains. And how do we support the cause from an education perspective and a culture shift? I'd ask that question of both of you to see if you've got any ideas on that, because I wonder if that's not our next best step, because you both each already have other solutions that we could bring to the table at the exact same time. You've got, policies, procedures, practices, et cetera. Ashwini's got tools and systems and methodology. What can we do to get this word out beyond these type of events, right? And I'm going to ask you first.
Oh, I'm going first?
Yeah, because you're in the center of my screen. I'm going for you
Okay,
first.
okay. I'll
Ashwini
make it
gets to
quick.
wrap it up.
Yeah, I was just drawing something. So I'm gonna bring things in perspective here. And I think I'm gonna get on a little bit of a soapbox for 30 seconds. So I oversee our major crimes bureau, and includes homicide. And 1.2 million people in the county. And yesterday we had our 12th homicide. So relatively low, unless you're one of the 12, right? Then it's 100%. But we work a lot of suicides. We will work hundreds of suicides every year. Now, yesterday, if you followed us on the police department's Twitter page, we talked about the homicide, but we didn't talk about the 22-year-old an hour later that took her life with a handgun. And we had over 100 so far this year. And how many have we talked about? Right. 0. That's because we don't talk about this in the private community either. So it's tough to break the shell and talk about it in the public safety space, because we don't talk about it in the community. It's pretty hard pressed to talk about it in the police. We don't even report on suicides out to the community. And I think we should.
I think you need to, and I think we collectively need to address this. It's sort of like it's only the reference is, if I say it out loud, it becomes a reality. Well, if we say it out loud, it might be a reality that is softened and or potentially mitigated. Maybe we can reduce those numbers. And you're right that, for the individual, it's 100%. But for the ones that are on the edge, for the ones that have a greater comfort zone to actually come to the table and say, I need a little bit of help or a little support here, that can make all the difference. Ashwini?
I think Major said it well. We got to talk. And I think I go with the 3 E's: educate. We got to educate everyone within the justice professional, within the public safety professional, and in communities. We need to engage in a dialogue. We need to engage in a dialogue. Peer-to-peer has proven to be very powerful, but we need to have a engagement with community again. And this thing. And the third thing is we need to empower. We need to empower these officers, our professionals, to go seek help. And if we don't empower them, we can have all kind of policies, we can have all kind of processes, we can have all kind of technology solution. We need to empower them to go seek help, whatever it takes. And the third thing is within the, I think we also need to, as a private sector, we need to seriously take a look at this, that quite often, yes, we're in a money-making business. One of the things that we have learned in the EAP programs when it comes to officer wellness, that we put a number. We basically say you're going to basically have 5 sessions. And what if 5 sessions don't cut it? Right. Well, you need more. Where do you go seek help? And there's the other drawback of our existing EAP program is that we basically stop. We basically give them a number to work with without understanding the problem. They might need 10, just give them 10. They might need 20, give them 20 sessions. We want them to get better. And that is something we have to fix.
Excellent. Couldn't agree more. Gentlemen, thank you once again. We appreciate it. Your messages are always right on point. We thank the audience for participating. If we haven't gotten to your question, know that we will close the loop with you thereafter. And I would ask that the audience take a break until 2:45, where we will address policy implications, bringing together NGA, NCJA, and National Center for State Legislator. All valuable opinions, all perspectives to learn from and to abide by. So thank you, gentlemen. Thank you all.
Thanks.
Bye.